Premier McLaughlin, it's always a pleasure to sit and chat with you. In just less than 48 hours, you're going to be presenting the annual budget address to members of the Parliament and the country. Premier McLaughlin, let's go back to 2013 and compare to what the budget looked like then to what it looks like, let's say, from 2018, in that 5-year period. Can you take us through some steps and give the general public a view of the significant changes that have taken place with our budget?
Hi, Donna. It's good to be here. Good to have this interview with you. It's been quite a while, I think, since we sat down together to talk about these things. But harking back to 2013, when I was first sworn in as Premier, we came to a situation, as far as the country was concerned, that was quite difficult. Cayman had still not yet recovered from the effects of the 2008 recession, which dragged on interminably. Government was still subject to UK government controls with respect to the budget, because we were still running a deficit, which I think then was around about $27 million. And we were not in a very good place. So one of the great challenges we had was first to provide the UK with assurances that we would put the country back into good fiscal shape as far as government finances were concerned. And that we were able to do. So we have gone from a situation where we were in a deficit and subject to the UK approval for our budget to a situation now where year on year we are turning a substantial surplus. We've also made significant progress in paying down government debt. Government debt was around $600 million when we took office. So when we took office in May 2013, government debt stood at about $600 million. When we pay off the bullet bond towards the end of this month, government debt will be around $322 million. So we have made substantial progress in paying down government debt, and by the end of this term, in May of 2021, overall government debt will be substantially under $300 million, because not only have we been paying down debt, but over the course of these 2 terms, the government has not borrowed any long-term money, so we have not incurred any more long-term debt. So not only have we managed to get government finances in good shape, in other words, producing balanced budgets with substantial surpluses, but we are repaying government debt at fairly high rates. We haven't borrowed any long-term money since we took office 6.5 years ago, and that is a major factor in helping us to repay the debt rather than increasing overall debt. And quite remarkably, and I say this advisedly because Friday will be 19 years since I was first elected, we have not just for one, but for 2 successive administrations, not increased fees and taxes. In other words, not putting any more burden on businesses and people in terms of government taxes. So, quite frankly, we are in a truly enviable position in fiscal terms as a government and as a country, and I'm incredibly proud of that. The budget that we deliver on Friday, I think people are going to be quite pleased about. It will be the biggest budget in revenue terms and expenditure terms the country has ever known. We are now in an arrangement where we deliver one budget every 2 years, so it's a 2-year term we're speaking about. And I'm not going to speak to the precise numbers now because I'm going to save that for Friday. But the budget, again, will have no new revenue measures. It will be fully compliant with all the principles of responsible fiscal management as set out in the Public Management and Finance Law. It will, again, demonstrate significant surpluses in both years. And I think, even more importantly, it will address a range of social issues. There will be increased support for the most vulnerable amongst us. There will be significant improvements in terms of civil servants. It will address, in a very substantial way, education needs, particularly with special education and with vocational training. It's a very, very good budget. It will provide for the continuation of the John Gray High School, completion of that, for the mental health facility, for significantly more road work. Key issues that are of concern to people: greater support to the police, and the establishment of the Coast Guard, border protection, all key things that are important to the quality of life here.
When you became Premier back in 2013, one of the big issues of concern at that time was unemployment, which was at a high rate of some 10.5%. Let's talk a little bit about that and where that has reached.
Right. I should never ever forget that, because the issue of unemployment was really the bane of my first administration, despite the fact that all of the indicators, economic indicators, were pointing in the right direction. Unemployment amongst Caymanians was just stubbornly, very, very stubbornly difficult to get those numbers to move. So we've gone from a situation when I took office as Premier first, where unemployment amongst Caymanians was at 10.5%, to a situation now where the latest ESO report indicates that Caymanian unemployment is down below 5% to around 4.8%. So we have made huge, huge strides on that front. And I think all indicators are that those numbers are just going to continue to get better because of the strength of the economy. Now, the strength of the economy is also creating some major challenges for us. The strength of the economy has meant that there are more people in business, that businesses are expanding and therefore requiring greater labor. So Cayman's population has increased significantly. That has meant that there's more strain on the infrastructure, and most notably with respect to the road systems. So we have to look long and hard at what we are going to do about transportation in the Cayman Islands in the medium to long term, while seeking to remedy these short-term issues by expanding the road network and improving that. We simply cannot continue down the road that we've been on all these years, where every person who comes here to live and to work is required to buy a car to get around, because there's finite space, and the island is only so big, or so small, as some would say, and even if we have all the money in the world, we're going to run out of space on which to put these roads. So we're trying to address both. One of the things that will occur as a result of this budget is the commissioning of a long-term transportation study to provide the government with options as to how we can meet Cayman's ever-increasing transportation needs as the population continues to increase. As long as Cayman continues to do economically well and has good stewardship as far as government is concerned, the government doesn't do crazy things and frighten people away by radical policies. I think Cayman, the future of Cayman is incredibly bright way into the long term. But that is inevitably going to mean continued significant increases in population. And we've got to build the infrastructure and the systems to manage that. Otherwise, the quality of life for all of us deteriorates. We see that on the road now. When you have to sit in traffic for an hour, hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours if you're in East End to get into town, that's not quality of life. And unless we put in place long-term strategies to deal with those things, we are always going to find ourselves in this jam. I think indications are that Cayman's population has increased by almost 12,000 people since I took office 6.5 years ago. So when people say there are too many cars on the road, I smile right and say, no, not really. We have too many licensed drivers on the road because the cars don't drive themselves. So it is very difficult to say to people, there's a lot of people are pushing that for us to restrict the number of cars that are imported, but as I said, the cars don't drive themselves. So if you tell people who are coming here to work that they can't buy a car, you've got to provide a means for that person to get around. You can't just simply say, no, people on work permits can't buy cars, as I've heard some people propose, because, as I say, people have to get to and fro, work and to get around. So Cayman is in a very good place economically, and government is in a very good place fiscally, but there are significant challenges which we have to address. Issues which will stretch well beyond my term as Premier. But it is my obligation, I believe, and that of my government, to do everything we can to put in place the necessary foundations to take some of these longer term strategies forward.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on was one of our main pillars of our economy is tourism, as we know. And when we talk about stayover visitors, we talk about cruise ship arrivals. Let's talk about a little bit about the numbers when you came in to power as Premier. What the numbers were like as it relates to, let's say, our cruise arrivals to the Cayman Islands, and where those numbers are now and where we'd like them to go and what we need to do to get there.
Before Hurricane Ivan, cruise passenger numbers had reached about 1.8 million per annum. By 2013, in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan and the global recession, the numbers were still at about 1.3 million. We are now, in 2019, at about 1.8 million. It was 1.8 million last year. We think we're going to be about 1.8 million this year again. So it's taken 16 years to get back to the pre-Ivan numbers. One of my abiding memories from the early days of my first term was the challenges that we faced daily from people involved in the cruise industry who were struggling to pay their bills, to pay the bank, to put food on the table because the numbers were so low. We had delegations of them coming here. What is government going to do about this? What is government going to do about that? Ironically, if we had been in a position then to proceed with the building of a cruise port, I doubt there would have been much opposition at all to it, because people understood then, in a very real way, how critically important it was. But what tends to happen with these things, not just with the cruise port, but with other things, is when things get good, people become complacent. People take this for granted and think that this is the way it's always going to be. But the reason the numbers have recovered are down to a number of things, not least of which is the very, very effective strategy or strategies that the Minister of Tourism, Deputy Premier, and his team have put in place and are giving effect to. And the other factor, of course, also has been the devastation caused in some of the Eastern Caribbean countries by hurricanes, and therefore reducing the number of options that cruise companies had. But it will be a huge mistake on our part if we think that this is on autopilot and that without significant intervention, Cayman is going to be able to continue to not just increase, but to maintain the kind of cruise numbers necessary to sustain the 4,500 plus people, who, most of whom are Caymanians, who work in the cruise industry.
There are a number of other projects that you mentioned earlier, the mental health facility, airports, schools, roads. These are some of the things that the government have continued to work on and will continue to work on. Another one is the waste management project and the partnerships there. Let's talk a little bit about how important partnerships are with the private sector and outside investors to a good extent for government to get some of these projects done for the people.
Right. Well, because Cayman is the Caymanese government is in such a good financial position, we have been able to negotiate from a position of strength, not just with the cruise partners who are engaged with our effort to build the cruise port and enhanced cargo port, but also with respect to the public-private partnership that we are pursuing with DART for what we call the ISWIMS project, the Integrated Solid Waste Management Systems. That is one of government's key priorities. It has been 2 years since the preferred bidder has been chosen, and the negotiations with DART have been difficult to get to a point where we can actually sign the overall contract. But in recent months, substantial progress has been made, and some key decisions have been taken to allow certain aspects of that project to proceed, while perhaps the more technical and difficult issues continue to be discussed. So this budget, the upcoming budget, will allow for the work, what is being called the early works bit to be done, which will include the closure and capping of certain parts of the landfill, while certain of the other works go on. The biggest technical challenge in terms of costing and so forth is the issue of the waste to energy plant. And so discussions about that continue and how that will work. But everyone will see significant changes at the landfill over the course of the next few months as they see 2 of the mounds that are there being closed and capped, and grass and so forth being planted on it, so that what is now called Trashmore will start to look like a nice hill.
Oh, okay.
A nice grassy hill.
Okay, let's go back to, we talked about cruise tourism, which ties in very much with the port project. We're in the midst of preparing for a referendum. Will this be something that will be discussed in the budget? And if so, what are your thoughts on this whole process at this point? What would you like to say to the viewing public?
About the referendum?
Yes.
Well, I think we've all made our position very clear, where government stands, and government will be bound by the will of the people. I actually embrace the referendum process. I have quite a bit of what I will call quiet pride in seeing an initiative which I personally, around the table many times in the UK and here, pressed for as being a part of our constitution, as the right of the people to initiate a referendum, actually work in practice. We feel strongly in government that the cruise port and enhanced cargo port are critical and necessary bits of infrastructure for Cayman if we are to continue in the cruise business. If we take a decision as a people that the cruise business is not what we want to be in, then we should vote no to the port. But anyone who believes that the status quo is going to continue are quite frankly dreaming in color, because we cannot continue to be the only jurisdiction at which cruise ships call in the entire region that does not have a berthing facility, and expect that that the increasingly big ships, which tend to have the more affluent passengers, are going to call here. So what I think all of us predict is if the referendum, if the no vote succeeds and the port project is halted, over the course of time, and I don't mean decades, over the course of the next 3, 4, 5 years, we are going to see a significant fall off in the number of cruise visitors here. And when we start getting back down to the numbers that we were facing in 2013, 1.3 million, that's when you're going to hear massive screams from people who rely on that to send their children to school, to pay their mortgages, to pay their bank for their cars, and put food on the table.
So the budget is coming on Friday. Why is it important for our people to tune in, whether it's radio, TV, on the internet, and listen to the budget? There's so many variables and so many elements and so many areas that are addressed within our budget that the average person needs to know about. Why is that important?
Well, I think I think engagement by the populace in what the government is doing is important generally, but particularly when it comes to the budget, it's important that people know what it is that government is planning to do with your money, because it is your money. We are the stewards of it. Is government spending it wisely in the right places, addressing the issues that are of greatest concern to you? How is this going to affect you and your life and the prospects for yourself and for your family? I think these are very important issues. And so the budget isn't just about government, the Minister of Finance getting up and saying, we are going to, we project that we are going to raise so many 100 million in revenue, and we are going to expend so many 100 million on expenditures. The important bit is, how is that going to be spent? On what is that going to be spent? Are we spending enough on education and in the right areas? Are we addressing the traffic issues? The key things that are of concern to you, you will be able to discern after the delivery of the throne speech, the budget address, and the policy statement. And I also urge people to listen to the debate, which will ensue for the next few weeks, as your representatives each have an opportunity to espouse and expound on the issues that they think are important. And as far as the government is concerned, individual ministers will take up some of the broader themes and references which I make in my statement, and expand upon them, so that, for instance, Minister Hugh, who's responsible for infrastructure, will go down into greater detail about how is it that we are seeking to address these traffic issues. I haven't sort of given a high-level indication of what the government is proposing to do. So it is, I think, important for people to tune in and to listen and to read and watch and listen to the various reports about the budget process.